Welcome to the Homeschool Show with NCHE. Our goal is to help you homeschool with confidence and joy. I'm your host, Matthew McDill, and today is June the 24th, 2024. Today in Homeschool News, I'm going to talk to you about the Mom's Retreat coming up in the fall, as well as give you some other important announcements and reminders. In our Homeschool Conversations, we're going to continue our series talking with homeschool pioneers, and today we're going to talk to Mary McLauren. And then in Homeschool Helps with Amanda, Amanda's going to continue her own homeschool story. She began to tell us about her journey last week, and she will tell us more and finish that up this week. Okay, in homeschool news, the Mom's Retreat is coming up. 2024 Fall Fun and Fellowship for Moms. This is going to take place on November 8th and 9th at the Caraway Conference Center. There's going to be a lot of encouraging talks, s'mores and conversation at the fire pit, crafts, group hikes, board games, hobby time. You'll be able to make new friends and bring your nursing babies. They're welcome. Otherwise, there'll be no childcare. So this has been several years going now, a really wonderful opportunity for moms to connect and be encouraged. So you can go to nche.com/moms-retreat and find out more, and we'll put the link to that in the show notes. One quick reminder is that it's important for you to remember to close your homeschool once you're done homeschooling. The North Carolina homeschool law requires that you close your school when you are finished. And it's important for you to do that so that the state can maintain accurate records of how many homeschools there are. And that allows us to maintain the type of freedom that we have now so that they don't try to create more ways of tracking us. So this is something we can do just to be cooperative. You can go to the North Carolina DNPE website, and I will include a link to that in the show notes as well, or give them a call at 984-236-0110. And you can let them know that you are closing your school. One more thing I want to let you know about or remind you of is our 40th anniversary. This year, 40 years ago, we began North Carolinians for Home Education, and that's what we're about to hear a lot more about from Mary McLauren, how NCHE got started. And you'll be able to hear this interview as well as many of the other interviews with our pioneers at nche.com/40 years. We also have a timeline there of some of the biggest events of our history and the homeschool movement. So you can go check that out and find out also how we can serve you more. You can trust us to help you help you on your homeschool journey. You can trust us because we've been doing this for a long time, and this organization has all the information and encouragement to equip you, the connections that you need, and the protections that you need. So check out that page and continue to get in relationship with walking with us on your journey so that we can help you on the way. Okay, going into Homeschool Conversations, once again, this is Mary McLauren, and she's going to tell us one of the most detailed descriptions now of how NCHE got started and the people who were involved step by step. Once again, it's very important for us to remember our history, remember how these kinds of things got started. And one of the things it does is it makes us aware that things haven't always been the way they are now. We haven't always been free to homeschool. And there have been pioneers in the past who have fought for that freedom and even sacrificed much to do the work. And so we want to be inspired and encouraged to be alert and vigilant and to continue to be a part of preserving our freedom as homeschoolers. So I hope you're encouraged by this conversation. Hello, Mary. We're really glad you could join us on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the honor of being on this show.
Yeah, and so as you know, we are continuing our talk with homeschool pioneers, people who were a part of the original beginning of this modern homeschool movement in North Carolina, starting in the 80s. And as you mentioned a minute ago, you have a little bit of a unique slant to this story, don't you? Tell me about that, how it's different.
All right, I do. I was in graduate school in Greensboro in early child development and family relations. And one day I got a call from a friend of mine who lived in Georgia. And I said, Gail, what are you doing these days? She said, well, we're homeschooling. I said, home what? And now you have to keep in mind this was 1982. Uh, Homeschooling was not only not legal, but most people had never even heard of it. And I was one of those who had never heard of it. So I said, you can't do that. And she said, well, not only can we, but you watch us. And I loved her family. And I said, well, I will do that. And so they were fighting in Georgia for the right um, for homeschool to be legalized. So they were going to the legislature and that kind of thing. And they brought in Raymond Moore. And maybe, I don't know if anybody has shown you this, it's a vintage copy of Homegrown Kids by Raymond and Dorothy Moore. And they, of course, are like the modern um, mother and father of homeschooling in the nation. And so they came to to Georgia, and I talked to one of my professors who loved children. She was a kindergarten specialist, and so I said, "Would you sponsor a an independent study course for me to study homeschooling?" And she didn't look at me like, oh, you're crazy. I mean, she said, well, I would. I would like to find out more about that. So here I go off to Georgia and went to this conference with the Moores. And so on Friday night, before the conference started, he was speaking in my friend's church. And he started talking about what are we created for? And he said, you know, we're not created to sit around on clouds and eat bonbons and that kind of thing. We're created to rule and reign through all eternity with Jesus. And he said, where does that preparation start? You know, and all these wheels in my mind are turning. He said, you know, if you want to build a car that will win the Indianapolis 500, you don't just go get it off the assembly line in Detroit. You build that car piece by piece by piece. And children are given to parents, and parents have the opportunity, however they choose to see that come together. And homeschooling is one of the options. So my world was beginning to turn upside down from you know, I'd never known anything except public education. I lived in a small town in the mountains. We didn't have private schools. We didn't have any of that. So, and life was very different at that time. And so, but my mind began to change, and I thought, oh, children really have been given to parents, and parents have the opportunity and responsibility to see that child form and molded. So that started the whole process of what is this homeschooling and can people really do it? So I did a little more research and wrote and defended in a class and different kind of things. Well, when I finished graduate school, I had some friends who had kindergartners, and they were looking into homeschooling, and Focus on the Family was really the only organization that was talking a lot about homeschooling, or some, not a lot, some at the time. So we'd gotten together and talked, and I heard their hearts. And so anyway, a professor of mine came up to me at the graduation, and she said, Mary, what are you going to do now that you've finished your graduate program? And sometimes, Matthew, you say things and you think, where did that come from? So just out of my mouth popped, I'm going to go to Raleigh, and I am going to lobby in the legislature to make sure that any parent that wants to homeschool their child will have that right to do it. And her eyes got kind of big, and and she looked
Wow.
at me. She was very influential, and she pointed her finger and she said, I've known you a long time, and I know that you, because I had her in undergraduate as well. She said, I know that you have the ability to influence people, and you better make sure you're right, because what if you're wrong? And I went, you know, because I thought, what if people really can't do this?
Uh-huh.
Because people didn't really, I mean, there were not at this point in time 42 years of research and curriculum. And I mean, people would go to Goodwill and thrift stores and pull books and put eclectic curriculum materials together. And I mean, could people really do this? So it was planted in my heart at that time to find out, can people really do this? So that spring, the spring of 83, this group of people who had been meeting together, and we met around Carolyn Winslow's dining room table, and we were talking about, let's get homeschool people together. And I know you've had Walt and Sandy Goforth on, and they said at that time, people didn't want their name on a list. People didn't want anybody to know that they were homeschooling. There were some umbrella schools at the time that was a real kind of edgy place in the law, but that was really kind of it. So we decided that we were going to have a conference, and Claudia Eldridge contacted Focus on the Family and got a list of names and contacted people, sent out cards and said, we will not let anybody know about this conference or know that you're going to be there and that kind of thing, but come if you can. Well, at the same time, the Del Contes and the Cockrams had been served, or around the same time, had been served warrants for their arrest for violation of the truancy law. So we asked Larry Cockram to be one of the speakers. And I think Gerald Van Dyke, who he and his wife Susan were in Raleigh, and they were in an umbrella school. And so I think Gerald was one of the speakers. And so we had this whole group come into Jamestown, a place called Solomon's Porch. And so all these people came. And it was a great day until the end. And this man came up, he was from Charlotte, and he said, oh, can I interview all of you? Because I work for the Charlotte Observer. And we kind of went, because everybody had been promised this is going to, be private. However, he and his family were homeschooling, and he did an article, and it was great. I mean, it was great. So at that conference, we discovered that there were 3 groups that had, unbeknownst to the others, been starting. There was the group in Charlotte that the Masons were part of, the Debbie and Spencer. And then there was a group kind of loosely formed in the Asheville area. And then there was the High Point, Jamestown. We didn't even really have a lot of people from Greensboro at the time, but that kind of group that had formed. So we stood there and made this decision. Should we all have 3 separate groups, or should we come together? What needs to happen? So we made the decision that, I mean, just like that it would be better to have a combined effort and more strength together than all separate.
How many people were at that first gathering?
That's a good question. We probably had 50 people, maybe more. But I mean, it wasn't 1 or 2. It was a good number of people at that meeting. I mean, there could have been 60, but it wasn't small, but it wasn't, people standing in the aisle kind of things. But it was a nice group. So we had representation from Raleigh. We had representation from Harnett County, Bowie's Creek. That's where Larry and his family lived, and the Del Contes. They weren't at that conference, but the Cockrams were. We had people from Charlotte and Asheville and Jamestown and High Point, and anybody that responded to that card, they came. So because all the people in the Greensboro High Point group were homeschooling their children, and I had finished graduate school, and I at that time was waiting on what the Lord had for me to do, work-wise, I had time and I was available. So they sent me down to meet with the some of the Charlotte group. And I don't know if you have talked with the Goldens, Kim and Jeff Golden. A whole group of us met and got together. And the Goldens had started the greenhouse report and had the little logo with the flower in the greenhouse and that kind of thing. And so we made a decision that we needed to officially launch into this North Carolinians for Home Education. And they asked me if I would be the president of the group because, again, I had the availability in terms of time and mobility. But that was also at the time when there was a lot of feminism and this group would spring up and that. And I thought, no, this does not need to be identified as like another woman's movement going on being developed. And I said, no, it really needs to be a man. It needs to be a daddy. And there was this wonderful man. He was a businessman. His name was Ron Fitch. And he agreed to be the first president. And I think I was vice president, and the Goldens were maybe secretary, treasurer, something like that. And so that was the beginning of the NCHE.
Welcome to Homeschool Helps with Amanda. I'm Amanda Wares, Homeschool Helps Director with NCHE. So for this video, we are going to continue on with my personal homeschool journey. So last time I told you about how we got started, up through how our first year went, and then my husband had seen the benefit of our year of homeschooling, and he agreed to come to the homeschool conference. And when we got there and he saw, first of all, just how many homeschool families there were, and also how diverse the homeschool community was. At that time, I will say it was not as ethnically diverse as it is now, but even then there would be very conservative, outwardly very conservative families and not so. So the diversity in older, younger, how they looked, all the things that really impressed and encouraged my husband. And then he went to a lot of the workshops. We went to some together, we went to some separately. And by the end of that weekend, his mindset about homeschooling had completely changed, completely. And he was like, okay, this is what we're doing. Here we go. So from then till now, he has been my biggest cheerleader. He has been my sounding board. If I have any issues, he even several different times, 2 different times in particular with our older son, when I was really struggling with our older son, he work schooled him for 6 months at a time, 2 different times. Now, granted, he owns his own company, so he has the freedom and flexibility to do that. But still, to go from being totally against homeschooling to homeschooling his son is it's huge, right? Along the way, we added a couple of children. Now we have 4. The older 3 are kind of closer in age, and then the last one is kind of an only child again, but we have experienced a lot of ups, a lot of downs, hard times, great times. I would say after now entering into the 20th year of homeschooling. This coming August will be the 20th year. If I could tell all of you listening to this video anything, it would be that there will be hard times. There will be days when you feel like a failure. There will be times when you may want to send your children to the school down the street. There may be those days. I am one of the biggest homeschool advocates that I know of, and I had those days. Okay? It happens. You are going to mess up. You're not going to get it right all the time. Your kids are going to mess up. They're not going to get it right all the time. But at the end of the day, it will be worth it. It will be. Every sacrifice, every, coupon that you have to cut so you can be home with your babies, all the time that you spend planning and teaching and stressing or whatever it is, it will be worth it. At this point, looking back a little bit in my homeschool journey, I will tell you that the thing I value the most from the years of homeschooling was the time, the gift of time, and the depth of relationship that I have, that we have as a family, that I have with my children, and that they have with each other. I have said this before, but I will continue to say it. My kids, my adult kids, and my young adult who's 15, they are my very best friends. And they are also each other's very best friends. And regardless, now I am extremely proud of their academic achievements. I'm extremely proud of the things they did in sports and dance and gymnastics and art and music, all those things. I love that they were able to learn and find their passions and pour into that. I'm so happy for all of those experiences that homeschooling gave them and gave us as a family. But I would say that the relationships that we have far outweigh all of that. I'm glad we have it. I'm glad we had those experiences. I am glad we went on all those field trips. I'm glad we learned all those things together, and did those experiments and hands-on activities and all those things. I'm so glad we did that. But if we had had all of that, all the academics, all the extracurriculars, if we had those and didn't have the relationship piece, it would not be worth it. But as it is, here I sit 20 years later, and I say to you, maybe it's your first year homeschooling. Maybe you are like I was, and you are scared, you're worried you're not going to get it right, all of that. And I will say to you, do your best. Do the best you can. And just bring what you have. Focus on the relationships. Enjoy that time that you have together. And in the end, it will be worth it for you too. I really hope this helps today.
All right. Thanks again for joining us this week. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at thehomeschoolshow@nche.com. And you can follow us on other platforms, on podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You can follow us and subscribe on YouTube. We'd love for you to do that so that others can find the show. And please just share it with your friends and your family. And until next week, Continue to homeschool with confidence and joy.